There are connections that arise unexpectedly, intense and inexplicable, as if an invisible force were pulling us towards someone. No matter how hard we try to rationalize it, there is something in that gaze, in that presence, that holds us, moves us, unsettles us. These encounters do not follow the logic of the mind. They obey a deeper, archetypal order of the soul. According to Carl Jung's analytical psychology, these bonds are not accidental. They are manifestations of a psychic process that aims to transform us. When we feel drawn to someone without any rational explanation, we are in truth standing before a mirror that reveals forgotten or repressed aspects of ourselves. These encounters are invitations from the psyche to the journey of self-knowledge, even if they disguise that calling in the form of passion, fascination, or mystery. If you have ever lived something like this, write in the comments, "I recognize the soul's calling." Within Carl Jung's analytical psychology, encounters that defy logic are understood as symbolic manifestations of the unconscious. When we feel strongly attracted to someone for no rational reason, we are faced with the phenomenon of projection, a psychic mechanism through which inner aspects, often unacknowledged, are placed onto the other. The person who attracts us begins to carry, without knowing it, contents from our own inner world, desires, fears, potentials, and wounds. This projection, however, does not occur by chance. It reveals what Jung called the shadow, everything we deny or fail to develop within ourselves. The other, in this sense, becomes a living mirror of what needs to be integrated on our journey toward individuation, the process through which a human being becomes whole and self-aware. Intense and seemingly illogical encounters can also activate the archetypes of Anima and animus, which represent the inner images of the feminine and the masculine psyche. When these figures are projected onto someone, we feel we have found something essential, almost mythical, but in truth we are approaching deep parts of our own soul through the experience of the other. These bonds are spiritual, not because they are mystical in the popular sense, but because they touch the core of our being and open doors to significant transformation. They serve as a calling from the psyche for us to look inward, to awaken. In this way, what appears to lack logical sense acquires profound symbolic meaning. The other is not just the other. They are a portal to an inner reconciliation. At many moments in life, we come across people who provoke intense and immediate reactions in us. Without knowing that person deeply, we feel an attraction, a connection, or even a discomfort we cannot rationally explain. Carl Jung identified this phenomenon as projection, a process through which unconscious contents of the psyche are cast onto the other, making us see in them traits that actually belong to us. When we project, we are not seeing the other as they are, but as the unconscious wants them to appear. These projections are not random. They arise to show us what is still unintegrated in our consciousness: forgotten potentials, repressed desires, unresolved fears, or even qualities we do not acknowledge in ourselves. The person who attracts us thus becomes a screen upon which our unconscious paints symbolic images of hidden parts of our being. This process is natural and often inevitable. When we fall in love with someone we barely know, or when we feel an immediate aversion to another person without an apparent reason, we are under the effect of an archetypal projection. The intense attraction in this context can be a calling of the soul for us to look inward and recognize what is asking for awareness. The pull is so strong that the rational mind cannot make sense of it, and this is precisely where many confuse projection with destiny or a spiritual connection. Yet from a Jungian point of view, spirituality lies exactly in this movement of self-knowledge, initiated through the encounter with the other. What makes projection a powerful path towards self-knowledge is the fact that once we realize that what we admire or fear in the other is actually part of us, we have the chance to expand our consciousness. For example, a person who feels intensely attracted to someone charismatic, bold, and free may be projecting precisely qualities that were repressed in their own story out of fear of judgment or social repression. The other, in that sense, embodies what still needs to be born within. Likewise, when we feel anger or immediate aversion towards someone, we may be facing a negative projection, where aspects we deny in ourselves are experienced in the other. These projections bother us not because the other is truly wrong, but because they touch an internal point that remains unresolved. The key, therefore, is to recognize the reflection the other represents. Jung stated that everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Following this line, we see there are no completely illogical emotional bonds. There are symbolic mirrors pointing to dimensions of the soul that want to be recognized. And it is in that recognition that the real work of integration begins. Projection, however, is not a mistake to be avoided. It is a necessary stage in the process of psychic development. The problem arises when we remain trapped in it, believing the other truly is everything we have projected. In such cases, we create bonds based on idealizations or rejections that cannot sustain themselves over time. The process of individuation only advances when we can withdraw the projection, that is, when we take back what is ours and allow the other to be who they really are. When we feel a strong, sudden, and inexplicable attraction, we should ask ourselves, what do I see in this person that actually reveals something about me? That simple question can open portals of perception and allow the encounter, instead of being merely a fantasy or a frustration, to become a profound instrument of self-knowledge and healing. Projection, therefore, is a symbolic language the soul uses to move us toward wholeness. The person who attracts us without logic may, in fact, be a living key opening inner doors that have long been locked. By recognizing this, we stop seeking answers outside and begin walking the true path of consciousness. There is something profoundly unsettling and at the same time fascinating about what we do not yet know within ourselves. This silent force working behind the scenes of the psyche was called by Carl Jung the shadow. The shadow represents everything that has been repressed, denied, or set aside throughout life. Impulses, desires, talents, personality traits, and emotions that, not being socially or morally accepted, were relegated to the unconscious. When we feel attracted to someone suddenly and without explanation, it may be that this person embodies precisely that shadow content we have not been able to assume in ourselves. The shadow is not composed only of negative or destructive aspects. Often it harbors creative, authentic, vibrant forces that were suffocated by family, religious, or cultural patterns. Thus, when we meet someone who expresses exactly those hidden qualities, our soul recognizes, even if the mind does not, that there is something there that belongs to us. And this sense of deep familiarity, though wrapped in mystery, is what generates the magnetism. The other confronts us with what we could be had we not cut ourselves back. That is why attraction so often follows no logic at all. What draws us is the reflection of our unexplored potential, our repressed emotions, the desire to live more fully and authentically. The encounter with the shadow is always ambiguous. It both frightens and fascinates. We feel fear because it pushes us out of the comfort zone, challenges us to review certainties, to drop masks. But at the same time, we feel an irresistible pull to approach it, because there lies a promise of expansion. Jung affirmed that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that is exactly what happens in these apparently irrational encounters. The other functions as a living mirror of our unconscious darkness. When we feel an intense connection without an apparent reason, it is possible we are before a reflection of our own shadow, personified in someone who, symbolically, is inviting us to look within. This invitation, however, demands courage. Integrating the shadow means abandoning the illusion of who we think we are in order to embrace who we truly are. The relationship with the other becomes, in this process, a field of revelations. The more intense and inexplicable the connection, the greater the chance it is pointing us towards something essential that must be recognized. And that recognition is not merely intellectual, it is visceral, emotional, transformative. The soul is moved because it feels it is reuniting with itself. In many cases, the shadow appears as behaviors or attitudes that deeply irritate us in the other. But in relationships of intense attraction, it often emerges as an admirable quality we feel we do not possess. We fall for someone bold because we were raised to be restrained. We are drawn to free people because we internalize the fear of making mistakes. The other, thus, symbolically embodies a forgotten part of ourselves, awakening in our psyche the impulse toward reintegration. Fascination with the unknown, then, is not an error of judgment. It is an archetypal movement. It is the psyche leading us into internal territories not yet explored. And the key to understanding this is to ask, what does this person awaken in me that I do not recognize as part of my identity? That kind of questioning opens space for the conscious work of integrating the shadow, becoming more whole and real. Ignoring this dynamic can lead us to create emotional dependencies or distorted idealizations. But by facing the encounter with humility and courage, it becomes possible to transform the bond into a process of self-discovery. The other ceases to be an indecipherable mystery and becomes a catalyst for growth. By recognizing the shadow in the other's reflection, we break with the limited view of identity and open ourselves to a deeper, truer experience of being. And it is in that immersion that we begin to live not merely encounters with people, but reunions with essential parts of our soul. Within Carl Jung's analytical psychology, there are archetypal forces that transcend the ego and shape our perceptions, fantasies, and emotions. Among them, two figures stand out in the realm of relationships. The archetype of the anima, which represents the image of the feminine in the male psyche, and the animus, which symbolizes the masculine in the female psyche. These figures are not real people, but inner personifications that profoundly influence our experience of attraction, passion, and emotional bonding. When we feel inexplicably drawn to someone, we are often witnessing the projection of these archetypes. The other, without knowing it, becomes the screen onto which we project the image of our soul, the anima or the animus. This projection is not a mistake, but an attempt by the psyche to reconnect us with internal parts not yet integrated into consciousness. Thus, the one who attracts us intensely and apparently without logic may be embodying exactly that archetypal image that has always lived in our unconscious. The anima in the male psyche can manifest as an enveloping, intuitive, sensitive, mysterious figure. When projected onto a woman, the man feels he has found something essential, almost divine. The animus in the female psyche appears as a firm, intellectual, bold, powerful figure. When a woman projects her animus onto a man, she feels she is before a guide, a mirror of inner strength. Yet what is truly happening is the symbolic encounter with undeveloped aspects of her own soul. These encounters tend to be overwhelming. They are experienced as reunions, as if we had known that person in past lives, when in reality we are recognizing something ancestral that inhabits us. The emotional intensity, the almost magical enchantment, the feeling of a shared destiny are direct effects of these archetypal projections. The other, in this process, brings us to the center of our own psyche. It is important to understand that the anima and the animus are not merely images of the opposite sex. They are pathways to inner wholeness. Jung believed a human being becomes complete by integrating the masculine and feminine aspects of the psyche. Thus, relationships that activate these archetypes are in fact bridges to individuation, the process of becoming who we really are. The experience of projecting the anima or animus is therefore spiritual in the deepest sense. It dislodges us from the rational plane and places us in contact with the sacred, the symbolic, the mysterious, but at the same time, it challenges us. The risk lies in confusing the archetype with the real person. When we project, we create fantasies, we idealize. We see the other as bearer of all answers, all beauty, all power, and when that image begins to dissolve, inevitably over time, we feel frustration, anger, or abandonment, not because the other changed, but because they never were exactly what we saw. The invitation of analytical psychology is to recognize these projections as opportunities. The person who attracts us deeply may indeed have qualities we admire, but what truly impacts us is what they represent within us. By becoming conscious of this, we withdraw the projection and begin to develop those qualities in ourselves. The woman who projects her animus onto a strong, determined man may discover that this strength also lives in her, waiting to be activated. The man who projects his anima onto a sensitive, creative woman may realize that his own sensitivity was repressed and needs to be embraced. These relationships then become symbolic laboratories where the soul rehearses its own expansion. The other ceases to be merely an object of desire and becomes an invisible teacher, not for being superior, but for reflecting something sacred that dwells within us. And by understanding this, we can approach the relationship not with the emptiness of one who wants to be filled, but with the reverence of one standing before a mirror of their own essence. In the end, attraction without logic is often the soul asking for passage, and the other, even unknowingly, is serving as a bridge between who we are and who we are destined to become. The anima and the animus are not romantic fantasies. They are symbolic expressions of our longing for wholeness. Human relationships, especially those that arise with intensity and no apparent explanation, are often seen as mysteries of the heart. But for Carl Jung, They are much more than that. They represent a symbolic stage where the drama of the soul unfolds in pursuit of totality. When we are attracted to someone illogically, our psyche is leading us into an encounter that precisely reflects the stage of our own individuation process. Individuation is the path of becoming who one truly is. It is a process of integrating the diverse aspects of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, ego and self, masculine and feminine, light and shadow. It is not a fixed objective, but an ongoing journey of self-knowledge and inner realization. And one of the most powerful ways to advance on this journey is through encountering the other. A relationship with someone who attracts us without logic may, at first glance, seem like an emotional accident, a coincidence of fate. But Jung saw in these encounters a psychic purpose. The other functions as a living mirror, reflecting not only what we are, but above all, what we have not yet become, the potential that lies latent in our soul. By relating to someone who awakens strong emotions, we are actually dialoguing with our own unconscious, which reveals itself through the presence of the other. These relationships are challenging because they throw us off balance. They open cracks in the ego's defenses, destabilize old narratives, reveal contradictions, and it is precisely in this space of vulnerability that individuation occurs. What we feel for the other is, in truth, a drive to reunite with forgotten parts of ourselves. That person becomes the stage where the inner drama manifests externally, visible, tangible, felt. It is not uncommon, however, for these relationships to enter crisis. When the projected image begins to dissolve and the other shows their human complexity, enchantment can turn into frustration. But this moment should not be seen as the end of the magic. It is a call to depth. It is when we are invited to set aside idealizations and see the other as they truly are, and at the same time, to see ourselves with greater clarity. The true encounter does not happen in the ideal, but in the real. When we recognize that the other does not exist to complete us, but to confront us, we are led into psychic maturity. The pain of disillusion becomes fertile soil for growth. The relationship thus ceases to be a stage of expectations and becomes a laboratory of self-knowledge. Often, the inexplicable bond leads us into repetitions. We feel attracted to similar types of people. We live the same conflicts. We fall into emotional cycles that seem endless. From Jung's perspective, this happens because the psyche is insisting on a lesson not yet learned. The other returns in new forms until the lesson is understood, and that lesson always points inward. When we can see the other as symbol, not as an object of desire or a savior, we take an essential step in individuation. We begin to perceive that the relationship is a mirror in which we can contemplate our own evolution. Every emotion, every conflict, every silence, every word reveals something about our inner state. The other teaches us not because they hold all the answers, but because they awaken in us questions we have not yet asked. This process is not easy. It requires courage to take responsibility for what we feel, to stop blaming the other for our abysses, to recognize that the spiritual path is also forged along roads of affection and emotional friction. But it is in that terrain,